In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they were still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. There was an interesting article that I came across entitled Aristotle on Immigration, Diversity, and Democracy. The author writes, "One of the most common causes of faction in civil war," he says, "was the unhappy consequences of unassimilated immigration and the consequent diversity. Aristotle's prose is perfectly clear. Heterogeneity of stocks may lead to faction, at any rate until they have had time to assimilate. A city cannot be constituted from any chance collection of people, or in any chance period of time. Most of the cities which have admitted settlers, either at the time of their foundation or later, have been troubled by faction. For example, the Achaeans joined with settlers from Troezen in founding Sybaris, but expelled them when their own numbers increased, and this involved their city in a curse. At Thurii, the Sybarites quarreled with the other settlers who had joined them in its colonization. They demanded special privileges on the ground that they were the owners of the territory and were driven out of the colony. At Byzantium, the later settlers were detected in a conspiracy against the original colonists, and were expelled by force, and a similar expulsion befell the exiles from Chios who were admitted to Antissa by the original colonists. The Zankli, on the other hand, the original colonists were themselves expelled by the Samians whom they admitted. At Apollonia on the Black Sea, factional conflict was caused by the introduction of new settlers. At Syracuse, the conferring of civic rights on aliens and mercenaries at the end of the period of the tyrants led to sedition and civil war. And at Amphipolis, the original citizens, after admitting Chalcidian colonists, were nearly all expelled by the colonists they had admitted. Thus, immigration of different peoples was a common source of conflict, often leading to civil war and concluding with the ethnic cleansing of either the native peoples or the invaders. I guess the argument that's being made is that the United States is pursuing the same course, and they are systematically replacing their population, and in doing so, they have to basically, with a heterogeneous population, they can no longer draw on the traditional kind of things that unify a people, right? Common religion, common culture, common language. So they have to, basically make it rival tribes united by a shopping mall. So we're not for Americanism anymore. We're for capitalism, commerce over the country. And this is one of the dangers that Cicero talked about thousands of years ago as well. He wrote in De Republica, "In maritime cities, too, a sort of debasing and changeable manners prevail. New languages and new customs are mingled together, and not only productions, but manners are imported from abroad, so that nothing remains of the entire pristine institutions. Nor did Carthage or Corinth, long before shaken, owe their ruin to anything more than to the unsettled scattering of the citizens who abandoned the study of agriculture and arms through their cupidity of gain and love of roaming. Many pernicious excitements, too, to luxury are brought over the sea to cities by commercial importation or by conquest." So he was warning about how when you become a mercantile civilization that's more based on commerce than on your own culture, the ruling elite starts to kind of debase and devalue their own domestic institutions because they become xenophilic. They overly value that which is exotic and foreign, and they're contemptuous of that which is domestic. And so they start to undermine their own institutions, and then they collapse, essentially. It reminds me of Hegel, the German philosopher. He said that the definition of a constitution was a document to preserve the ethos of a people, right? And he said that government only existed to preserve that ethos into posterity, right? And so what is an ethos? An ethos is like the feeling of a thing, as we've discussed before. Like the ethos of a theme park is fun, the ethos of a horror movie is fear, and so different peoples have ethoses. The ethos of the United States used to be liberty, as an example. The ethos of China might be tradition. And so the job of that constitution is supposed to be to preserve that ethos. And when the society starts to become mercantilist, when it starts to kind of become unfocused because of demographic changes, it starts to turn on the original kind of founding documents and the founding principles and values. And it can no longer preserve that ethos, and those are going to have ramifications, of course, not just for the country itself, but for the entire international order, which leads us into international news. As the U.S. had to accommodate everybody, it had to strip away its own culture, thereby coming to stand for nothing. Bill Cosby famously said, "I don't know the formula for success, but I do know the formula for failure, trying to please everybody." The United States seemed to exemplify this. As it tried to stretch beyond its own foundational roots, it no longer sought to be the Christian Sparta it was conceptualized as by Samuel Adams. To accommodate Jewish people, they jettisoned Christianity and inaugurated something new called Judeo-Christianity. Then came in the Muslims, and they had to erase the foundational culture even further. Then Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, Satanists, and so forth. By the end, it had erased everything that had originally made it what it was. In this void, nihilism rose up. Perhaps that's why Victor David Hanson said, "Things are becoming so strange, so surreal, so nihilistic in contemporary America that the chaos can only be deliberate. Chance, incompetence, and accident could not alone explain the series of disasters we now daily witness that are nearly destroying the country. There are resulting consequences that radiate out from this. Countries who used to love the old America no longer recognize the new reinvented economic zone for all. Hence why there's a French bestseller, U.S. is a Nihilist Empire. It makes the case that the planet is losing confidence in a country with an identity crisis, or more to the point, multiple personality disorder. Instead of being focused and precise, America is incoherent and morally decadent. America cut its moorings not only from its past, but from its values. The book makes the point that it was revelatory to countries like France that American soft power is crumbling away because of it. They attacked Russia with sanctions, but Russia not only survived, but thrived. They instigated the Ukraine war, but couldn't provide enough bullets or ammunition for the conflict. Nations around the world started to wonder how much of U.S. power was in fact fake. Moreover, as the article goes on to describe, courting obvious controversy, he points to the LGBTQ revolution, which signaled a definitive end to Christianity as the dominant moral force in the West. Between 2005 and 2015, virtually every nation under American influence legalized gay marriage, and most went further with the normalization and acceleration of transgenderism. Todd seems not particularly conservative on this issue and in interviews has made clear his preference for equal rights for all, but as an analyst he is unsparing. He argues that most of the world is strictly patriarchal in family structure, as opposed to the more bilateral or more equally influenced by mothers and fathers structures common to the West. This may have made the West more receptive to political liberalism, but it has also given rise to a gender radicalism which particularly explains the indulgence granted Russia by the peoples and governments of Iran, traditionally highly distrustful of Russia, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Some degree of feminism may have advanced globally, but not in Western form. The question of morals, Todd argues, has probably for the first time emerged as a critical factor in international relations. It's significant that there's an inverse relationship between America's power and its declining ethical character.
As far as the global element of wokeism goes that you're talking about, I mean, this is really what the American empire, as you called it, has been reduced to. The most visible element of sort of American cultural hegemony abroad is LGBT iconography. Right. We will fly the rainbow flag at our embassies abroad. We'll fly it at the Holy See and in the Vatican. We will fly that everywhere, even in Muslim nations, right, where typically the U.S. government is very careful to speak of Islam as the religion of peace and respects those values, but then they're perfectly happy to display the rainbow flag in places where certainly the local population would see that as anathema to their culture. The fact that this is the bridge that sort of American global hegemony is going to die on is, I mean, it speaks to your point, which is just how far we've fallen.
And we'll have to track this more. We find this weird, but that's perfect because we are leading into the News of the Weird segment. There's an interesting article that says, could we all be psychic? Research suggests our brain acts as a filter that limits our psi abilities. The human brain and nervous system have astonishing capabilities that allow us to make sense of the environment around us in a multitude of ways: touch, taste, sound, smell, sight. But is it possible that our brain also restricts what we can sense? Aldous Huxley famously suggested that our brains might also act as a reducing valve, restricting our access to a much greater amount of information actually available to us via psi-like abilities such as telepathy and clairvoyance. In this, he was following the suggestion of philosopher C.D. Broad, who himself was citing a proposal by Henri Bergson. The suggestion is that the function of the brain, nervous system, and sense organs is eliminative and not productive. Each person is at each moment capable of remembering all that has ever happened to him and of perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe. The functioning of the brain and nervous system to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge by shutting out most of what we should otherwise perceive or remember at any moment, and leaving only that very small and special selection which is likely to be practically useful. This article is actually forcefully in point because I'm doing a podcast currently called Classic Paranormal, which you can check out on Apple and Spotify. And I'm doing a book by a gentleman called Hamlin Garland from 1936. And he is kind of researching, psychic phenomena. And it's called 40 Years of Psychic Research. And he basically comes to the conclusion that a lot of the phenomena that he's witnessing is being produced by the mediums themselves. And he considers it as abnormal psychology, an adjunct of abnormal psychology. And he thinks that the mediums are actually producing real phenomena, real things are actually happening. That's not a lie. They're not being dishonest about it. It's happening. But he sees it as kind of spillover, right? Where your neurological system should be filtering these things out. Like, for instance, when you're in the dream state, when you're dreaming, it's easy to manifest something. I'm going to manifest a bowling ball. Boom, it appears, right? That functioning is supposed to be shut off when you're in the physical plane, right? When you're awake, that's supposed to be shut off. But what if it isn't? What if some people have a problem with their neurological system, with their brain, with their, their senses, and their things that should happen only in the dream state are happening here? We usually call it manifesting, right? People believe in manifesting. Well, you manifest in the dream state normally, right? But it's supposed to be shut off, between the two areas. And he noticed that a lot of the psychics usually go into a sleep state, right? A trance state, or they would have mesmerists with somnambulists who they would put into a sleeping state. Edgar Cayce famously is an example of the sleeping prophet. He would go into a sleep state and then the phenomena would manifest. And so it really does suggest that merrily, life is but a dream, right? But this kind of physical reality, this physical plane, is more kind of static, and it's supposed to be static. But true reality outside of the physical plane is more like the dream state, where past, present, and future are happening simultaneously. Things meld into each other. There's amalgams, and So it's just interesting, Hamlin Garland's take on that these are not superpowers. In fact, it's a disability, is what he was saying. It's an adjunct of abnormal psychology. So, and he noticed that a lot of the psychics too had damaged neurological systems, like fried neurological systems, that if they were healthier, the phenomena would essentially stop. So I find that an interesting take on it. I mean, there's three general takes, maybe four. One is that it's, demons, of course. The other, that they're true ghosts and they're real. You're talking to your Uncle Ed. And the third is this abnormal psychology, and we're really a lot more powerful than we think we are, and that our neurological system is supposed to kind of filter that out, shut that down. And when some people's neurological systems aren't working properly, you get kind of spillover from the dream state into the physical plane. So, and this leads us into our obituary section. Speaking of ghosts, unfortunately, we're going to be talking about Henry Fambro, last surviving original member of the Spinners, who died at 85. Henry Fambro, the last surviving member of the iconic R&B group, the Spinners, whose hits include It's a Shame, Could It Be I'm Falling in Love, and The Rubber Band Man, died Wednesday, as spokesman for the group said. He was 85. Fambro died peacefully of natural causes in his Northern Virginia home, spokesperson Tanisha Jackson said in a statement. The group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in November. Along with Fambro, Billy Henderson, Purvis Jackson, Bobby Smith, Felipe Wynn, and John Edwards were listed as inductees. Well, such was your daily briefing. I'd like to thank you for stopping by the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. Catch you next time. Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.